Do not judge, or you too will be judged. There are things in life we only see on the surface, never realizing the vast sky hidden behind them. Like when we look at a forest from afar, we think it's just a stretch of treetops, until we step inside and discover an entire world breathing, complex, and full of untold stories. In that famous science fiction film where humans encounter a new civilization, the greatest lesson was never about technology, it was about understanding. Only when we stop judging do we truly see each other's hearts. Today, I want to take you on a journey inspired by that spirit, not on a distant planet, but aboard an American aircraft carrier drifting across the endless ocean. At the center of this tale is Captain Athelin, the man considered the strictest in the fleet. Cold, unreadable, and unapproachable. But like the secrets hidden beneath deep waters, the truth about him lies not in what people see, but in what he carries inside. And one day, every judgment will be tested, so that all may finally understand. No one truly knows what battles another person is fighting. Across the vast ocean, where the sky and the water seem to blur into one, the aircraft carrier USS Aegis Wing moved steadily forward. The colossal ship resembled a floating city, with white lights lining the flight deck, the deep rumble of engines echoing underneath, and fighter jets resting silently like sleeping steel birds. Each day unfolded with intense rhythm. Pilots training, technicians checking every single bolt, communications officers monitoring radar signals without pause. Everyone carried a heavy responsibility on their shoulders. But one man bore the heaviest burden of all, Captain Athelin. Athelin was nearly 50, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that looked as though they could pierce through any hint of negligence. To the crew, he was the Iron Man, the cold wall, the captain who never smiles. New sailors often whispered, "He looks at you like you've already done something wrong. He's so strict nobody dares get close." I doubt he even understands human emotions. But no one knew that in moments when he stood alone on the command tower, Athelin often gazed at the sea with quiet, thoughtful eyes. Not because he was arrogant, not because he wanted to appear distant, but because he carried an old memory, a memory that kept him cautious, stern, and always trying to protect his crew by keeping them at arm's length. Down on the flight deck, a group of young officers were discussing the upcoming drill, a large-scale exercise simulating an emergency technical failure on an aircraft. Among them was Ryson, a capable but insecure young officer. Rayson had made a mistake in a previous operation, and since then, he always felt the weight of the captain's gaze on him. He confided to a friend, "I don't know, it feels like Captain Athelin doesn't trust me." His friend patted his shoulder. "Maybe he's just strict, doesn't mean he dislikes you." Ryson sighed. "He never says anything other than orders. I can't tell what he thinks." What he didn't know was that, not far away from the highest level of the command tower, Athelin was watching him practice each maneuver with careful precision. And in those eyes that seemed cold, there was a flicker of worry. Athelin remembered another young officer, a bright-eyed man with a warm smile who had once trembled through his early drills just the same. That officer had not survived a tragic accident, one Athelin hadn't been able to prevent. From that day on, Athelin vowed never to lose another young officer to inexperience or carelessness. But he never learned how to express it. So the crew only saw the stern exterior, and never the fear of loss hiding underneath. Tomorrow, the USS Aegis Wing would enter the biggest drill of the year. A drill that could ignite Ryson's confidence, or crush him beneath the pressure. And during that drill, every misunderstanding, every judgment, every silent distance between people would be put to the test. Before them lay the open sea, but before their hearts, a storm yet to be named. The morning of the biggest drill of the year cast a palpable tension over the entire USS Aegis Wing. On the flight deck, F-35s and FA-18s were pulled into position as each technical team worked with both speed and precision. Strong ocean winds slammed across the deck, carrying salt into every metal seam. Rayson stood beside his flight helmet, his gloved hands slightly trembling. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. A young officer beside him asked softly, "Nervous?" Ryson gave a crooked smile. I just don't want to mess up this time. Feels like the captain is watching my every step. He's always like that. It sounded like a joke, but it weighed even heavier on Ryson's heart. 8 a.m., the drill begins. The PA system crackled to life. All units, take your positions, begin emergency simulation. The deck instantly came alive. Alarm horns blaring, metal clanking, dozens of hurried footsteps. Fighter jets were maneuvered into mock takeoff positions. Ryson's task was to guide F-35 number 09 into a safe zone before the simulated rescue team took over. It wasn't a difficult task, if not for the pressure crushing his chest. Up in the command tower, Captain Athelin stood rigid, his eyes locked onto every movement below. Though he said nothing, his deputy Marcy noticed the tension in his shoulders. Worried about him, sir? Athelin didn't respond. Ryson moved toward the F-35 and began signaling. A sudden gust hammered the flight deck, making the surface slick. Behind him, a technical crew was resecuring tie-downs on another aircraft, blocking his line of sight. At the same moment, an air controller made a small error reading the wind direction, a seemingly harmless mistake. But on a flight deck, one tiny factor could ignite a chain reaction. Ryson gave the standard signal. Slightly right. But with the wind shift and the slick deck, the pilot interpreted it as a signal to turn left. The 30-ton F-35 suddenly pivoted the wrong way, 1 more meter, and its wing would slice straight into the technical team behind it. Stop! Stop! Voices screamed from all directions. But it was too late. Part of the wing clipped a metal toolbox with a deafening king. The damage wasn't severe, but it was enough to halt the entire drill instantly. The PA system barked, "Cease all drill operations. All technical and coordination teams report in." Ryson froze in place. His arms hung limp, his eyes wide with shock. A few officers muttered irritably, "Him again? Wrong signal. The captain is going to explode." The heir turns to lead Ryson was summoned to the temporary technical meeting room on the deck. The air inside was so heavy, he felt like he was walking into a courtroom. A coordinating officer snapped, "Your action endangered the entire team." Another scolded, "Were you not paying attention?" Yet another, "If this were real, someone could have died. Do you understand that?" Ryson kept his head down, his hands shaking. He wanted to explain. He wanted to say the wind shifted, that the deck was slippery. But no one wanted to hear it. To them, he was the sole culprit. Then heavy footsteps approached. Everyone stood at attention. Captain Athelin entered. Ryson felt his heart plummet. He thought, "That's it, he'll remove me from the team." Athelin scanned the room, his eyes cold and deep. Silence swallowed the room. He asked, "Who here witnessed the entire sequence of events?" A few hands rose. "Who clearly saw Ryson's signals?" About 7 people. "Who confirms the wind shift?" Only 2. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Athelin walked straight to Ryson. The whole room held its breath. He asked slowly, "Ryson, do you know where you went wrong?" Ryson swallowed hard. "Sir, my signal wasn't interpreted correctly." But Athelin said something no one expected. "Correct, and that was not your fault." The room seemed to explode in silent shock. No one understood what was happening. Athelin turned to the air coordination team. "Your wind data was wrong. That directly affected maneuver direction." To the technical team, "You were standing outside the safe zone, blocking visibility. And finally, the deck was not dried according to protocol." Everyone lowered their heads. No one dared argue. Then Athelin looked back at Ryson with eyes no longer stern but warm, even sorrowful. "Don't let others judge you when they don't see the whole picture, and don't judge yourself over a moment that was misunderstood." Ryson stood frozen. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. After the meeting, rumors explode. Even though Athelin clarified the truth, on a ship of 2,000 people, information never travels straight. In the cafeteria, the captain defended him without reason. Is he favoring Ryson? He must like weak officers, that's why. On the deck, the mistake was obvious. Why did he handle it like that? Has the captain changed? No one knew the full truth. No one knew Athalan's painful memory. No one knew why he protected Ryson. They only judged, as people always do. And those undercurrents of judgment would soon lead to a far greater event, one that would force everyone to confront reality. The afternoon drifted by under a growing heaviness, as if the storm itself were waiting just beyond the horizon to strike. Dark clouds gathered in massive clusters, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. The USS Aegis Wing continued cutting through the waves with power, but even the most seasoned sailors sensed something was wrong with the weather. In the weather and navigation control room, the radar began flashing red. Deputy Commander Marcy frowned. "Sir, a low-pressure system is forming to the southeast. Wind speed is rising fast. We may need to change course." A few officers exchanged uneasy glances, but Captain Athalan stood still, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the sea through the glass. The wind grew stronger, and long waves curled like silver serpents beneath the dying light. He said simply, "No. We maintain our current heading. If we turn now, we'll run straight into the stronger spiral. Staying on this line is safer." A young officer spoke up, voice trembling. "But sir, the radar shows the eye of the storm expanding." Athalan turned, his voice eerily calm. Storms have rhythm. They breathe. When the eye expands, it's often a transition phase before it contracts again. Keep going. Some officers exchanged puzzled looks. One whispered, "Is he overconfident?" Another replied, "Maybe he's trying to prove something after this morning's meeting." Those whispers reached Marcy's ears. She looked at Athalan, irritation creeping into her chest at the crew's baseless judgments. But Athalan didn't react. He had grown used to being misunderstood. Meanwhile, in the technical room, Ryson sat replaying the video of the morning drill. He wanted to understand what he'd done wrong, what he could have done better. But the more he watched, the more he realized he hadn't been wrong. Yet the whispers hadn't stopped. The doubtful glances, the comments people thought he couldn't hear, the heavy sighs when he walked past. Liam, Rayson's closest friend, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ray, you did fine. The captain said so himself." Rayson exhaled shakily. "You don't get it. Everyone thinks the captain defended me out of favoritism. They think I'm weak, that I got lucky." Liam's voice hardened. "And you're going to let their words define who you are?" Rayson didn't answer. In his mind, Athalan's morning words still echoed. "Don't judge yourself over a moment that was misunderstood." He had no idea that Athalan had meant those words for himself just as much as for Ryson. The storm arrives faster than the radar predicted 1940. The wind shifted abruptly. The deck shuddered as though a giant hand had shoved the entire ship from beneath. The alarms blared. "All crew, prepare for Category 1 storm protocol. Repeat, Category 1 storm protocol." The sea erupted into towering walls of water, slamming against the hull with explosive force. Several sailors slipped on the wet deck, scrambling for handrails to steady themselves. On the command tower, Marcy shouted over the roar of the wind. "The storm is stronger than expected, sir." Athalan remained steady, one hand braced on the control panel. "Adjust thrust. Hold our heading. Do not alter the rudder angle." A young officer broke in, panicked. "If we don't change course, the ship might tilt too far." Athalan slammed his hand onto the panel. "Follow my orders!" The room fell silent. Only the storm's fury filled the air. But the silence didn't last long. Another officer whispered quietly, just loud enough for others to hear. "He's losing control. He's not thinking clearly. He's trying to make up for the drill this morning." Each word was a blade. But Athalan didn't turn. He focused on keeping the ship alive. 20:05. A sharp screech rang out from the port side. The system alarm blared. Tie-down number 12 has failed. Aircraft number 12 is sliding. The command room erupted in chaos. Marcy shouted, "Get the technical team on deck now! If that jet hits the fuel bay..." Athelin cut her off. "No one goes down there. It's too dangerous." An officer protested. "But if we don't act, the ship will not explode," Athelin roared. The room froze. No one had ever heard him shout like that. But he knew something they didn't. In a storm like this, stepping onto the deck was suicide. And yet, one person did not hear the order. One person had seen everything from the lower deck's access window. One person felt compelled to act, no matter what anyone said. Rayson. He saw the F-35 sliding. He saw the trapped technicians unable to reach it. He saw the fuel bay just meters away. And even though the wind outside was strong enough to hurl equipment across the deck, Rayson ran out into the storm. Liam shouted after him, "Rayson, don't!" But Rayson didn't stop. His eyes were no longer those of a man afraid of judgment, but of someone who knew what had to be done. The storm slammed into him, throwing him several meters across the deck. He forced himself up, clutching a railing so he wouldn't be blown overboard. Then he pushed toward the sliding aircraft. In the tower, an officer screamed, "Captain, someone's on the deck!" Athelin spun around, and in that instant he saw Rayson, small, alone, fighting the raging storm. Athelin's heart seized. "Rayson, stop!" But it was too late. Rayson had grabbed the jet's cable, and the wind immediately lifted his entire body off the deck. Athelin didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He ran out of the command room, tearing down the stairs, breaking every safety protocol. No one could stop him. No one even tried. The storm outside was furious, but the storm inside Athelian was worse, because he knew with terrifying clarity, history was repeating itself. The storm's wind lashed across the flight deck of the USS Aegis Wing like thousands of watery whips. Rain sliced through the air in silver needle streaks under the lightning. The giant ship shuddered, tilting and fighting to stay upright against the ocean's terrifying might. Rayson was still wrestling with the cable, which was straining tighter under the wind's force. He was being pulled backward, his boots gripping the wet steel deck to keep him from being blasted away. The scream of metal scraping rang like a threat. He shouted into the wind, "Don't slide any further!" But the storm obeyed no one. A sudden vortex of wind slammed into him and lifted his body clear off the deck. He still tried to hold the cable, but the gust was too fierce. He was clinging with only one hand. On the command tower, Athelin races to the deck. Captain Athelin had just barreled out of the control room, yelling into his radio, "Hold all positions! No one goes on deck! Repeat, no one goes down!" Yet he knew he couldn't stand by and watch Rayson fight the storm alone. Not again. Not this time. Not ever again in his life. He plunged down the steel stairs, gripping the handrail to steady himself as the ship listed violently. Officers tried to call him back, but no one dared stop him. Athelin's eyes were no longer the stern gaze of the captain. They were the eyes of a man terrified of losing another young life. A life he had not fully understood. A life that had misunderstood him. Bang! A metal plate crashed across the corridor. Athelin dodged to the right, nearly stumbling, but he rose at once. Nothing would stop him from saving Rayson. Nothing. Rayson held the cable with one hand. The other hand slipped on the slick steel. His body hung, half in midair, below him the black, roaring ocean. 1 second, 2 seconds. If he let go, he would be hurled into the sea, or worse, dragged into the path of the sliding aircraft. In that instant, a steel hand grabbed Rayson's wrist. "I've got you!" Athelin's voice cut through the wind, overpowering it. Rayson opened his eyes, unbelieving. "Captain?" Athelin ground his teeth. "Hold on to me, do not let go." Another gust hit, nearly sweeping both men off the deck. But Athelin slammed his boot onto a steel cleat, planting himself with every ounce of remaining strength. Dawn arrived gently, as if the night storm had never happened. Soft golden light slipped through the last remaining clouds, casting a warm glow over the rippling sea like a sheet of glass. On the flight deck of the USS Aegis Wing, puddles from the night before still lingered, reflecting fragments of the morning sky like small pieces of heaven resting on steel. The crew gradually gathered on deck. They spoke far less than usual. There were no jokes, no quiet whispers of judgment. Instead, a thoughtful hush settled over them, as if everyone was re-examining what had happened. Rayson stepped out from the rest quarters, limping slightly, but clearer and stronger in spirit than ever. When he appeared, many crew members looked at him, not with suspicion anymore, but with admiration, gratitude, and respect. Liam slapped him on the back. "Ray, you were incredible. You had the whole ship holding its breath last night." Rayson smiled faintly, but his eyes drifted toward the captain. Athalan stood at the bow, arms crossed, gazing out into the vast ocean. For the first time, Rayson did not see a wall of iron, but a man who had fought a silent battle for years. A man Rayson had once misjudged. He walked forward and stood beside Athalan. He said nothing. They simply looked out at the sea together. After a long silence, Athalan spoke, his voice deep but gentler than ever. "You all right?" Rayson nodded. "Thanks to you, I'm still here." Athalan looked at him with a warmth that surprised Rayson. "No, you're here because you trusted yourself. You didn't let go." Rayson inhaled deeply. "Captain, I'm sorry for misunderstanding you." Athalan placed a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder. "Everyone has fears, and when people are afraid, they judge. What matters is that you overcame it." The intercom crackled, calling the entire crew to assemble on the main deck. Deputy Marcy stepped forward, her voice ringing clearly. "All hands, attention, the captain will speak." Athalan walked up, slow and steady. The deck fell into absolute silence. He looked at each face, men and women who had endured both the storm outside and the storm within. "Yesterday, we proved something important, that true strength does not come from steel or engines or wind resistance." He paused, letting the ocean breeze carry his words. "It comes from courage and trust, and from refusing to judge one another before we understand one another." No one spoke, but many bowed their heads, acknowledging the silent guilt they carried. Athalan continued, "I hope that from today onward we look at each other with understanding, not with assumptions." The sunlight broke fully then, shining across the deck and illuminating every face, a gentle blessing. The crew burst into applause, not for a speech, nor for Athalan's rank, but because they finally saw the real man standing before them. Rayson lifted his gaze toward the sky, feeling lighter than he ever had, as though the storm had swept away every fear, every misunderstanding. And in that moment, he understood. His journey was only just beginning. In this life, we are often too easily swept away by what our eyes see. A stern look, a brief word, a single mistake. And from that, we rush to place labels on others. But a person is never just those scattered moments. Each one of us carries a long story, filled with wounds, hopes, effort, and silent battles no outsider ever sees. The story of Captain Athalan and Rayson reminds us that, when we stop judging, we finally see the person standing before us. When we choose understanding over conclusions, our hearts grow wider, and we become a light for someone who has lost their way. Life will always have storms, both outside and within ourselves. But if we choose to look at each other with kindness, patience, and compassion, then even in the fiercest storms, people can still save one another. May this story bring you a little warmth, a little hope, and the strength to live with greater gentleness each day. Because sometimes, just one non-judgmental glance can change the entire course of someone's life.